Where you think the major, I will say, challenge you have right now in our field when it comes to AEC? I know you mentioned staffing earlier, but I mean, overall, what do you think our major challenge right now?
I think that the staffing is a facet of the larger issue of the knowledge in this industry is leaving or has left and has not been rebuilt. I think the 2008 crash obviously drove a lot of people away from architecture, and I imagine on the engineering side as well for a pretty extended period. Certainly caused people to not go to school for this work. And so, here we are, 15 going almost 20 years later from the first signals of this, and we are sorely lacking in people that are like 10 to 15 years of experience in this industry that might be that kind of middle manager, not quite ready to lead a firm, but certainly should be educating and sharing their knowledge with the youngest folks now coming in. And so there's a really big gap there, and I think that also drove a number of folks maybe towards earlier retirement or other industries to where I don't think we've got those late 50s, early 60s guys and gals that have that knowledge to give back. So much of what we do well in this industry is lore based. We don't have a lot of systems we write down and checklists that you follow. There's a lot of using your head and learning from the people that came before you. And I think there's less opportunities for that. So we're so much younger in the industry now that guys like you and I, as smart as we may be, we're basically the thought leaders in our mid 40s with, really halfway into a career with very few people that have been doing this longer and know better than us to continue teaching us, let alone teach the youngest generation. And so we've got to start coming up with new modalities of basically preserving knowledge for, shit, if this happens again and people leave the industry suddenly, how do we capture what they know? When Jeff Cutbirth retired, we spent 4 years working with him trying to figure out how to get as much as we could out of his brain before he did. Butler's maybe got a couple years left before he'll become kind of a cultural attaché, having cigars with you and shaking hands out in public, but not really here educating our staff and showing them how to do what he spent 30 years building. So how do we draw that knowledge out of him without having to sit him down for 8 hours a day and say, teach us stuff? We've made a pretty deliberate shift away from the notion that we're a teaching firm to being more of a learning firm. We can engage with people who are interested and passionate about what it is they want to do. We'll engage with that all day, but you can't come to me and say, teach me everything you know. I don't know how to engage with that. Where do you start? And I don't have the time to spend, every day, all day trying to teach somebody what I know. What I can do is respond to what they want to draw out and that they'll address passionately and with energy. So trying to promote, the youngest staff to drive that passion and interest in what we're doing to force their own learning and knowledge gain. We're having to push people into positions maybe that are a little over their head and let that retractable leash out a little bit more and try to be more of a support system so that, they might fail a little bit, but it doesn't take a project or, a client or anybody down with them. And I think, maybe 10, 15 years ago, the industry was more sheltered in that way. I don't know how you're seeing your office, but yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think, like a lot of things happening it has to be visual, it has to be quick. There is no much patience to do a long, deep dive on one problem to solve, right? And it's unfortunate because this could affect creativity in a way. But I feel like even in engineering, as dry what we do, the 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 software took a big step forward, right? The 2D modeling and how you do things or whatnot, where you could have a lot of the new generation really good on the software. They could do the model, but it's got to be what we try from our side. How can we use the technology to be playing a role as well, not just a little bit on the creativity side sometime, and then more on the quality control. How can you visually present a challenge or present a problem so they could see it also and almost like a real life? And we've been trying to push this a lot. How can we implement technology in a way that it's visually helping them to expand their creativity, or at least to see, what's the problem here, or what's the challenge? Like you and I talk about, where we have from a civil side, you could have this beautiful building and a beautiful development, and we come in and we do our beautiful fire hydrant or backflow preventer at the sign you just design, and paid a lot of money on, right? So I think getting in to present these element on a visual way, and using technology more and more is obviously something we have to tap into. It's not even an option, you know.
Yeah, and I think, the extension of that is we challenged everybody in performance reviews in October to, come to those reviews with something you think is not worth your time. And it's something that you're doing every day, but is chewing into the eating away at those opportunities to be either engaging your creativity or, more importantly, engaging your expertise, whether it's creative or otherwise. That if we can offload to tech, things like AI, or take the busy work of just taking meeting minutes and notes and find other ways to accomplish that, how much more can we free you up for the things that actually need, your intelligence, your capacity as an architect? Because we just don't have the time to, what used to maybe be 3 people addressing it, we can do with 1 now. And we can do it and maintain good quality, but it means that one person really has to be focused on their highest and best use, not just chasing every little email and whim that comes in. So we can be smarter through tech to allow people to do that. So we can continue to, do with 38 to 40 people what most assume we're doing with 80 to 90.
Yeah. Where do you think the things that they do today that probably may slow down the process for them or get to be a little bit more an obstacle throughout the project? Like, I mean, throughout the all stages, where do you see the most complication or obstacle that they have to overcome or could affect the speed of your project?
Some of it's maybe endemic to the way we approach architecture in the field that maybe engineers don't have, because you guys are a little bit more system oriented than I think architects are. Architects as a whole, the minute you tell them have a system and a checklist, they feel like you've just cut their creativity right off. And so everybody kind of resists that. And then every time we approach an effort, no matter how repeatable it is, it feels like you're starting over and doing it from scratch. So, number one is to get honest and really start to systematize the things that we should, and not see it as such an affront to who we are as architects and our creativity. We don't need to reinvent the wheel every time we do another mundane task. We could save that energy for the ones that really need it. And so there's just a lot of that. I mean, nobody fills out timesheets particularly well. And so being able to, automate that. I mean, just dumb stuff like, I wrote a routine last week using Claude that scans my entire sent email box and my entire calendar, and then pre-fills out a timesheet based on what it assumes I was doing, what project numbers, this and that. That's cut 2 hours a week out of just messing around trying to do stuff that, arguably a personal assistant or somebody else might be able to do just as well. But now we've just automated that for 4 cents every time I run it. Claude can basically do 90% of my timesheet work. And so finding those kinds of things that, are repeatable, but maybe we don't even need people to know how to do it to kind of stay compliant with some of our back end. But setting up projects, proper file structure. When I go look for something that my team's working on, the same file might be in one folder, and when I'm working with Jay or the other team, their equivalent files in a completely different place. I'll never be able to find it. So being able to engage tech in a way that allows us to start searching our own file archives in a way that any given person can look for it in the way they would think to look for it and still find it, I think is that next big kind of evolution of using, rather than folder structured tagging and more thought-oriented ways of organizing data. So starting to engage with a new kind of cloud service that'll host all of our file structures so that we don't have to argue about what folder some obscure thing should be saved in. It almost doesn't matter where you put it. You'll always be able to find it. So I think trying to eliminate some of those busy work tasks is crazy. On the project side, we spend so much time, certainly in planning, as when we engage that with you guys, just on the due diligence side, when we sit down and put pencil to paper and figure out, what's the highest and best use of this piece of property. How sure are we that we've captured every easement potential encumbrance? We really don't know till we have, civil and sometimes zoning attorneys and people really run down all of those strictures. But, it's nice to be able to take something like the tool you guys are building and at least build, with maybe 30 minutes of messing around in that tool, a higher level of confidence from go to know that the first thing we put on paper is more likely going to match the final version than be a best guess. And so eliminating some of that due diligence at the outset or shortening that span so that we can really be ready to go. In the post-pandemic world, we used to be able to have an hour before you'd walk into a meeting and actually feel like you were going in prepared. Now you have a meeting every 40 minutes, and it's, if you have a chance to stop and go to the bathroom during the day, it's a surprise. So the vast majority of us are walking into meetings not really getting even that 10 to 15-minute reset we used to walk in feeling like we were utterly prepared. We've all gotten better about being prepared on the fly, but it is amazing to be able to walk in with a tool on my phone or in my pocket that when someone asks a question, I don't have to say, hey, let me get back to you, or try to fire an email to somebody on my team who can run with it behind the scenes. It's nice if I can legitimately either find it in our files right away, or, grab an AI tool and be able to look up, okay, what is that bit of information? Because so much of the decision making and the creativity we put into it is not behind the scenes and then being presented in a meeting. It's being demonstrated and put to work in the meeting, is because that's when we have that time together to make progress. So meetings used to be work and then report, and now we're doing the work in the meetings, which is cool.
Good thing when you expediting the due diligence phase, I guess. And is it like, I mean, coming in, Sunil mentioned using the tool to get in faster responses. Is this affecting your internal workflow and affecting your relationship with the client and their project? Or is it mainly the benefit is only internal? Can the client, I mean, how does the client benefit from it, I guess?
Well, I think it's both. I mean, that example I gave you at the outset of the meeting we had last week, someone sat down and they said, Jesus, we bought this site and I can't remember what our height restrictions are, but, within 2 minutes I said, well, your height restriction is this. Well, this is somebody who we've not worked with in almost 15 years that thinks they'd like to engage us again. And right away in a meeting, they tell us about their property we have no prior knowledge of, and I can, with confidence, state something they couldn't remember. So we look good in the marketplace to somebody who's knowledgeable about the ordinance and opportunities around here when we can do that. I mean, it used to be when you sit down with a piece of buff paper and Sharpie and you can, as they're describing what they want, you can kind of draw it live in front of them. That still remains the most impressive thing we do to people who are, not in this industry, that we can capture their ideas in 3D that quick. And so being able to do that with some of the technical aspects of a project, I think is really important. If I bring a new project manager to one of my clients who I've been working with for the last, 8 to 10 years and say, trust this guy, he's really knowledgeable. If that PM is equipped with a tool that helps him demonstrate that knowledge right away, you just get better buy-in on that stuff. So, and I think we always caution, go into a meeting and say, I think this is the answer, but let me verify it and I'll get back to you. If you can eliminate that let me verify it barrier, because it's so easy to do it right then and there, I feel like we just make progress a lot faster. So
I completely agree. And, I think a lot of time the client, sometimes they know what the process, they know how it takes, but I don't think some of the client have done all of this digging due diligence on to get the information. So probably sometimes they don't realize how fragmented this data is and how tough is it to find some information, because you could have one overlay after one overlay and you could have different design guideline and different ordinance and different planning document. So I don't know if, do you think the client realize all of this complication on the data when you source it out and you bring it in? I mean, do you think all of them are familiar?
They're not buying the value we deliver, they're buying our time. And I think, some of the fees that we command, if people understand how little time some of that takes, it's effort and application of our expertise and the value they're paying us for. But, when we do a 1 million square foot industrial bomber, we are a lot more profitable than when we do a 5,000 square foot retail building. It's a much bigger fee, and the fee's more indexed to value. It's the same generally amount of time and energy and duration that we put into it. So people say, well, why do you make so much more money on the industrial? Because it's much more valuable in the marketplace.
But it's amazing for you to be able to use the technology on how much leg up you have on some of the competition, because I don't think a lot of consultant, at least, they're entrenched into what's going on in the technology or what's going on in AI. There is so much going on that you kind of like have to tap into, similar to what you mentioned on Claude, as little as, timesheet.
Yeah.
And still a lot of people didn't get to tap into this yet. And it's going to create a big shift in what we do for living, for sure. And I think even from the client side, the client, probably there is some savvy client, as you mentioned, going to be also looking at things on how to reduce, engaging some of us or whatnot, right? And how can they tap into some tool to be able to do what they need to do. I don't know if you've seen it from your side, though. Is it like, do you see any shift from the client side on how the project is planned? Is it, or even if it's not using AI, do you see a shift on what we're doing today? Anything you think is different from how we were doing it 5 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most obvious answer to the entire process, and you're a big piece of it, is on the civil side. And,
Yeah.
and it's not so much clients driving it, it's been municipalities. They've been understaffed since we came out of the pandemic. And for whatever reason, they've added greater requirements on entitlements in particular. And so the burden that's put on civil and traffic engineers and ultimately us through those entitlement processes has become just astronomical. And to the extent really, civil grading and drainage has to be 100% done. Landscape has to be, 90% CE level. And that's usually at a stage where we may not even solve the damn site plan yet, right? So it's crazy how much has gotten front loaded from a municipal standpoint to where architecture and architects don't drive schedules anymore. The civil processes do. And so when someone comes to us and says, what's it going to take to make this happen? My first call right now is to either the civil engineer they've already got on board or one that, I would be comfortable bringing in that can help us orchestrate what has arguably in this market, most of the sites that are left are encumbered in some way and complicated. Otherwise, probably were already developed. So, that's a more macro trend. But I think the lack of staffing and oversight at some of these municipalities has forced them to just kind of put more requirements on all of us to prove it because they don't really have the staff or the capability to review it as thoroughly. And so they're not, which is good. You and I have professional stamps that say we're ultimately responsible. We would like the municipalities to kind of get out of the way, but I'd also like them to, when we're obligated to meet the building codes, allow us to do that without having to prove every little bit of it to them. And so I think their requests have gotten greater and they're really driving a completely different approach to that early stage entitlement that's engaging civil much more than they ever were earlier in the process. And you guys need to be on it almost before we do, except that realistically in this marketplace, we haven't found a civil engineer that can creatively do feasibility and solve kind of for should we even develop the site in the same way that, we do. Maybe that's a little bit of ego on our part, but in other markets, we go work in New Mexico, architects do not create site plans. That's 100% owned by civil groups. So we were an anomaly. We went out there and started working on a couple of projects and the civil engineer said, well, wait a minute, the architect will actually own the line work and solve where the sidewalks go and all that stuff. And they were really excited for that opportunity. They said, realistically, that's not our expertise. That's just the way it works in this market. And we're finding that, Nevada and parts of Utah is the same thing. Those are entirely generated and driven by civil. But I think from a user experience part of it, what we bring to the building side is what we like to bring to, making more memorable site plans and then engage groups like SEG to come in and say, okay, now how do we make it work from a technical standpoint? And that's where our demands on, you and others on the civil side are much more on the creative aspect of being an engineer and not so much on the mathematical side. I think the part that certainly separates you personally, Ali, apart from some of the other engineers we've engaged with is you'll sit down in a design meeting with that same piece of buff and a Sharpie and help solve for it, knowing the engineer is going on, is in your head, but coming to a creative solution that makes for unique sites, not just balances, cut, fill, or walls, right?
This is what make what we do fun, honestly. I think, like it's mass personality where creativity, it's great. The thing is on being creative, you have to always remind yourself on creating the bandwidth to it, right? Because we could all go with the flow, I guess, and just figuring out, do the same thing. But to take a step back and it's like, what, and not to push back sometime on a new idea or new approach, I think it make a big difference. We had, as even from us internally, like using this tool, like I'll give you an example. I mean, we've seen it where due diligence report that used to take 2 weeks to be put together. Now you're able to do it at like 4 to 6 minutes. But the saving is not just 2 weeks. The saving is way beyond 2 weeks. Because what happened is sometimes you're starting early on a project while you're developing UTD and you're putting a test bed and you're putting a site plan, right? And you may make the wrong assumption along to it. So, and then this could take 2 to 4 weeks, in preparation. So the 2 weeks compound way more than just, the timing is taking. It affect every aspect of the project. It affect performance. could affect building orientation, could affect setback, could affect, FAR. So it's kind of like, I mean, it compounds really quick. And this is why, when I look at zone, code requirement, local jurisdiction, uh, I mean, they all play a big role on early on, along the way. But early on, this first step of due diligence and size assessment, it's amazing how much it make a big difference on project, right? And how much it could make our life easier when you develop your layout. You don't need to change parking, dimension. You don't need to change setback.
Yeah, there's the very real hours we put into doing those drawings, but every one of our clients wants to go to that first pre-app meeting and have the municipality say, "We have no notes. You guys thought of everything." It's to your point. If I have a tool that if I go to a pre-app and they say, "Hey, don't you know your parking spaces have to be 18, not 16?" I kind of look like an idiot for missing that basic thing. But maybe that was in a more obscure overlay we didn't know anything about. Whereas if I could have, now I could have drawn it right, saved the hours of having to redraw it. But I also, in that first pre-app now, you set a tone when you go in saying, "Hey, we know what we're doing." And they legit respond with, "Well, we have no notes," because clearly you do. The first time you may have an issue with a municipality where they're interpreting something different, that team remembers that you kind of have, your heads on straight and know what you're up to. And nothing gets approved on first review anymore at DR, permitting, or otherwise. But we've been able to, specifically as some of these municipalities are understaffed, be able to go in, talk to the people that are leading the charge in some of these other spots and just say, "Hey, we got a really great working relationship. We have, the city's interests in mind, and we've been really good with these submittals." And they say, "You know what, you're right. We'll kind of get out of the way on this one." And so, maintaining that reputation and that sense that you know what you're doing just accrues so much value. I think that's part of where some of our clients don't realize that's a value. When you hire us, you're hiring that relationship I have with Scottsdale that's going to allow us to get things approved faster and with less friction. And yes, you might have hired a different architect to produce a set of CDs that looks substantially similar to mine, but we're going to get through that project faster and easier as a result of that relationship.
Yeah, sure. The friction is great because now the more prepared you are, the more relationship you're building based on respect. And, okay, even if you don't align on what you're trying to do, but the more information you gather and the more information you know about the code and the planning and whatnot, and the more educated you have about the process, it's really created an amazing relationship. And it's a practice. There's municipality and its staff, and we've seen it. Yet this is why you can mention names, about you have direct contact with, mainly because of the type of the work and the preparation and the quality. I know I want to be respectful to your time. I so appreciate you attending here. I want to leave it in on one note. If there is any insight or lesson from your side, like along the years, that you would like to share for our industry, would be awesome. Whatever it is, any lesson learned or any insight you've seen or trend that you would love to share with us.
I think the most critical thing to where I find success personally and in trying to promote it in others, because that's mainly my job these days, is find what motivates and inspires somebody. And it may have nothing to do with what it is that they're supposed to be doing, but promote that and stoke that fire and drive their passion. And it is stunning how much better and invested they become at everything else they tackle. And so it's part of why we're so invested in supporting our own staff outside of the world of architecture, so that they come to the world of architecture excited and ready to work every day. And somebody who maybe is a project coordinator and doesn't have specific aptitude here might be really great at managing a project in this arena. And just because they're not a PM doesn't mean they can't do it. We're going to give them that opportunity and support them and try to really grow their aptitude. And we'll shift gears as a firm, support the talent that you have and read that talent and go that direction. Don't fight it. Hire good people and support them to do great work. And
I love this.
Critical message. And it's driving everything Corey and I are doing around here. And the key piece of that is to be vulnerable as hell up and down the ranks. Because if you don't admit when you don't know or did something wrong, the rest of us can't rally to support you in the way that you need to be. And so, admitting you screwed up or there might be a problem as early as possible gives us the greatest opportunity to provide that support and promote better solutions. And
I love it. I love it, Ken. And, I say the same thing. I get in to be, I tell people, I'm really a good civil engineer. Along the way, I meet a lot of people and say, hey, you're an amazing civil engineer. You should start your own business. And what they're telling you is you start doing something that you don't know about, or you're not as good at that as what your technical background. And this has been a great journey for me. I mean, especially with the stuff the last 3-4 years, and I look into it. I always had the feeling you have to be a little bit uncomfortable in order to, adapt, in order to grow. And what you mentioned, I learned this in February, kind of like a more sophisticated presentation way, and it was more like you have to be agreeing to be bad to be great, which is amazing. I never thought about it. Like, we all have something that we beat to death that we're not great at, and we put so much resource on it because we want it to be great, and it doesn't have to. Like, look into what you're great at, those top 3, 4, 5 attributes, focus on it, and maybe stop spending less time at what you're not at good at. And, tell your client about it. I mean, I have clients that have sub-service. It's like, hey, we do it because we feel it's like one point of contact, but we're really not great at it.
Yeah.
I'm great here. I'm great here. I'm okay here, right? And I think this setting expectation, even on a not just internal, even external, sometimes it make big difference because people realize you don't have to be great at everything. There is stuff that it's okay not to be the best at. As
Yeah.
long as you know it and you don't beat it to death, It's like, I love, bro.
Blind spots are fine. The problem is not knowing you have blind spots, and knowledge that you have them means we can find somebody to add to the team that's actually not just something they're good at, but something they really love and thrive at, and they take the burden off of you. But maybe, furthering your point, the other thing is, the fact that we focus so much on the things we're not good at is a sign that we really care about what it is we're doing. And sometimes we need to extend ourselves a little bit of grace to say, we take ourselves to task for what we're not good at. But on balance, are we pretty damn good? Does the market, do our clients, does everybody really appreciate what it is we're putting out there? And we probably don't do enough in the industry of patting ourselves on the back a little bit and saying, we're so focused on what we do poorly, we sort of lose the forest for the trees there and don't spend enough time acknowledging our successes and encouraging everybody more in that direction. So.
Yeah.